Okay, video number 4. So this is chapter 4, which is about like notes, scales, and chords, and it's mostly like theory stuff. So there's actually no harmonica exercises in this chapter. So I won't be playing the harmonica, unfortunately. So basically, I mean, it's mostly just really obvious stuff in this chapter. It's like, so at first it brings up like octaves and how like things can have the same pitch or whatever, but be an octave apart. And it talks about how that's like because the frequency is double. And then they basically say like between the octaves they were kind of I hate this. For like historical reasons, they just like broke it up into like 7 natural notes between the octave, and then later added like the half notes for 12 between them. But that was they don't really go into why, but that was just kind of like how it was done historically. So yeah, there'll be between like the two like C's on a scale, there'll be like the 7 normal notes, and then there'll be sharps and flats. So it talks about like what a sharp and what a flat is, and then like in terms of whole tones and semitones, which are like full steps, like on piano, like between most of the white keys if there's a black one in between, and then semitones or half tones, which are like a white to a black note, or like E to F, are semitones. And then it talks about thinking about those in terms of intervals. So like a first, a second, a third, a fourth, which is like basically just the number of like you think about on a piano, like the number of keys away it is on the piano in terms of white notes. And then you can have like you have like a major third or a minor third depending on the exact number of semitones. So like a minor third would be 3 semitones, and a major third would be 4 semitones. And there's also major and minor second, and like for other ones it has different names, but there's basically different qualities of those intervals. And then it talks about like the key of a song, so that basically they describe in terms of like the note that kind of is like the bass note that kind of the song is like centered around, and like for most music will like end on the note that it's in the key, and how the tonal center, and then they like talk about scales, and how there's different types of scales, and how they're often referred to just by their like tonal center, like the key that it's in. And they say that there's diatonic and chromatic scales. Diatonic having 7 notes from a certain key, and chromatic being having all 12. And then diatonics will sometimes borrow from other notes for songs. And then they talk about like your standard major and minor scales. Major usually having the 3rd degree of the scale is major, and that would have a minor 3rd degree. But then there's also different like types of major and minor. And for the C harmonica, C, F, and G are common major scales that are played, and A, D, and E are common minor scales that are played. And it talks about like relative major and minor, so like the like for C, if you play starting from the A, that would be the relative minor. So even though it utilizes the same notes, depending on what like note you consider as the tonal center, that can affect like what the key is. And then it talks about like modes, like modal scales. So like that's just like depending on what note you start on in a certain key. It'll sound different. Basically, that's all I say about it. Like you could, for C, you could start on any of the different notes. So those basically kind of become different scales. And then, and then it talks about is how you can convert from C. You can just like make certain notes sharp or flat to then transfer it to other scales. So like if you're playing in G, then you would do F sharp instead of F, just to maintain the same pattern of half notes. Then then they talk about chords and how chords are like just like a root note. Well, they're generally triads for your simplest chords, which is so you're gonna have a root and a third and then a fifth, and then depending on whether it's like a minor or major third, or depending on whether it's like a normal fifth or an augmented fifth, then you're gonna have like minor or major chords or augmented chords. And then they talk about how you could also have a diminished minor third and diminished fifth. And then they talk about how you can like add notes to those and make them like seventh or ninth chords. And then they talk about chord progressions and how basically the only chord progression they bring up is like 1, 4, 5, which is like pop music kind of chord progression. And then they say that sometimes people also use other chords, which is sick. And how those like 1, 4, and 5 will be major in major keys, or some will be minor in minor keys. And then it talks about just how to write down like musical notation like on a staff. So like, you know, I don't know how to describe this in words, but it's like just musical notation, like the lines and the, you know, if the note is on the line and then in between the lines and then on the line, like each of those is a half tone or whatever. And that how like the key will be indicated by on the left hand side with like if there's sharps or flats there, which is all good fun. They say that the spaces on the staff spell out face, good way to remember it. And then they kind of have this like, I don't know, they just talk about, yeah, I mean, like if you draw like the sharp or flat symbol next to a note, then it's sharp or flat. And then they show where all the, I don't know if you can see that. They show like what, so the bottom there is like the blow notes and the top, or top is blow and the bottom is suck. And that's just like where each of the notes are on a C harmonica. But they haven't taught me how to play notes yet, so I can't do that. But you would learn, because we're now on to part 2, starting to make some music. So hopefully there will be more harmonica playing in this glorious month of April. On that note, farewell.